The year was 1954. Manhattan was dressed in its finest that March evening. Amber streetlights catching the wet pavement, taxicabs moving like slow rivers down Fifth Avenue. And inside the Mayfair Grill, the most exclusive dining room in New York City, a string quartet was playing Debussy to a room full of people who had never once been told no. She walked through the door at 7:43. Audrey Hepburn, 24 years old, fresh from an Academy Award she had not yet fully believed was real. She was wearing a pale dress with white gloves that reached her elbows, and she moved the way she always moved, quietly, as though the air around her was something she didn't want to disturb. One step behind her was Clara Simmons, 34, her wardrobe assistant, and the woman who had, for 2 years across 3 film sets and 4 countries, been the steadiest presence in her life. They were laughing about something. Clara had said something sharp and funny on the sidewalk outside, and Audrey was still smiling when she stepped through the door. The maitre d' saw Audrey first. His name was Gerald Whitmore, 52 years old, silver-haired, white jacket, a man who had managed the Mayfair Grill for 19 years and prided himself on never losing composure. His face opened into a wide, practiced smile. He stepped forward with both hands clasped, ready to welcome the most celebrated actress in America. Then he saw Clara. The smile didn't collapse, it simply recalibrated. Something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly, just enough, and his right hand came up, palm facing outward, white-gloved, polite, immovable. The string quartet played on. The silverware clinked. Somewhere in the room, a man laughed at something his companion had said. And Gerald Whitmore said, in a voice so low that only the 3 of them could hear it, "Miss Hepburn, what an extraordinary honor. Your table is waiting. But I'm afraid your companion will need to find other arrangements this evening." For a moment, no one moved. Audrey's smile didn't disappear. It did something more unsettling than that. It held, perfectly still. Her eyes moved from Gerald's face to his raised hand, and then, very slowly, back to his face. The whole room seemed to contract around that moment. 3 tables nearby had fallen quiet without knowing why. A woman in a green dress had stopped lifting her wine glass. Clara touched Audrey's arm, lightly, the way she had touched it 100 times before, on film sets, in dressing rooms, outside hotels that had refused her a key. The touch said, "I know these rooms. I know how this goes. We don't have to make this harder than it already is." But that moment didn't start there. To understand what Audrey Hepburn did next, what she said, what she chose, and what it cost her, you have to go back to where she came from. Because the woman standing in the doorway of the Mayfair Grill had survived something that most people in that restaurant could not have imagined. And it had left her with a promise she had made to herself a long time ago, a promise she was about to keep. If this story is already reaching something in you, stay with us, because what happens in the next few minutes did not just change one dinner, it changed everything that came after it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and keep watching, because the best part of this story is the part that history almost forgot. Audrey Hepburn was not supposed to be standing in a Manhattan restaurant in 1954. She was supposed to be dead. Not in any dramatic sense, just in the quiet, statistical way that war erases people. She had grown up in Arnhem, Netherlands, during the Nazi occupation, a child who learned to survive on tulip bulbs and silence, who watched neighbors vanish from their doorsteps in the middle of ordinary afternoons, who understood before she was 10 years old that the world could decide, without asking you, that you did not deserve to exist. She had watched a Jewish family from her street, the Rosenbergs, a father, a mother, 2 daughters younger than her, loaded onto a truck one November morning in 1944. A neighbor across the road had closed his curtains. Audrey had stood at her window, frozen, watching through the glass until the truck disappeared around the corner. She was 15. She never forgot the curtains closing. She never forgave herself for the glass. That war left her with one conviction, that no amount of fame, no studio contract, no magazine cover ever softened. Silence, when someone is being diminished in front of you, is not neutrality. It is a choice. And it is always the wrong one. Clara Simmons had come into Audrey's life in the spring of 1952, assigned to her wardrobe on a London film production. She was 32 then, precise, quietly brilliant, with hands that could repin a hem in 40 seconds flat, and an eye for proportion that the costume designer deferred to without ever admitting it. She was from Savannah, Georgia, and she had learned long before London, long before film sets, long before Audrey, how to move through rooms that were not built for her. She learned which doors to try and which ones to walk past without slowing down. She learned how to make herself smaller in spaces that required it, and how to do it so smoothly that no one around her ever felt the weight of what she was carrying. Audrey had noticed, over 2 years, the small disappearances. The times Clara said she'd eat later, the times she waited in the car, the times she found reasons not to come inside. She had told herself it was preference. Standing in the doorway of the Mayfair Grill, Gerald Whitmore's hand still raised between them, she understood for the first time that it had never been preference at all. Gerald Whitmore had handled difficult moments before. 19 years behind that host stand had taught him that every uncomfortable situation had an elegant exit, and that powerful people, when offered one gracefully enough, almost always took it. He had managed senators, film directors, and at least one foreign dignitary who had arrived without a reservation and expected a table in 4 minutes. He had never once lost control of his dining room. He was not losing control now. He was certain of that. "Miss Hepburn," he said again, his voice carrying the particular warmth of a man who believed he was being reasonable. "You are, as always, an extraordinary guest. We have your usual corner table prepared. I simply must ask that your companion—" He paused, searching for the phrasing that caused the least disturbance. "Make other arrangements for this evening. There are several fine establishments on the east side that would be better suited." Audrey looked at him for a long moment. "Her name," she said, "is Clara Simmons." Gerald nodded, as if the name had been offered as information he was grateful to receive, rather than a correction he was meant to feel. "Of course," he said. "Now, if you'll follow me, Miss Hepburn, your table—" "Our table," Audrey said. "I made a reservation for 2. The room had been quietly listening for the past 40 seconds without fully realizing it. The table nearest the entrance, 4 men in business suits, mid-conversation about something that no longer mattered, had gone completely still. A woman 2 tables back had set down her fork. The string quartet, sensing something without knowing what, had drifted into a softer passage. Gerald's practiced smile held, but the warmth behind it was cooling by degrees. "I understand your position, Miss Hepburn, but I'm afraid our policy—" "Audrey." Clara's voice was low, steady, the voice of someone who had said the next words, or words like them, more times than she could count. "It's all right. I'll wait outside. I know these rooms." She paused. "I've done it before." 4 words. Audrey turned to look at her. Really look at her. Not the way you look at someone standing beside you, but the way you look at someone you suddenly realize you have never fully seen. 2 years. Every film set, every dressing room, every city. All the times Clara had said she'd eat later. All the times she had waited in the car. She had never once complained. If this story is moving you, hit that like button right now, because what Audrey says next is something nobody in that room ever forgot. 11 seconds passed. Later, 3 separate people who were sitting near the entrance of the Mayfair Grill that evening would each describe the same thing when asked about it. Not what was said, not what happened after, but those 11 seconds of silence in which Audrey Hepburn stood completely still and did not speak. One of them, A retired judge named Arthur Pennington would tell his daughter years later that it was the most deliberate silence he had ever witnessed in a room full of people. Not the silence of someone searching for words, the silence of someone who had already found them and was deciding whether the world was ready. Audrey was thinking about a truck, a November morning in Arnhem, a neighbor's curtains closing. She was thinking about Clara's hands, quick and warm and precise, adjusting the clasp of her necklace in a dressing room mirror 2 hours before the Roman holiday premiere, whispering, "You look like a queen," and meaning every word of it. She was thinking about all the restaurants, all the hotels, all the cars Clara had waited in while Audrey sat at tables that were never questioned, eating meals that were never complicated, moving through a world that had been built, quietly and completely, to accommodate exactly one of them. She turned to Gerald Whitmore. "I would like to ask you something," she said. Her voice was very quiet. That was the detail every witness remembered first. Not anger, not volume, just a quietness that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "In 1944, I watched people I knew disappear from my street because someone in authority decided they did not belong. The people who allowed it told themselves it was not their law, not their policy, not their choice." She paused. "So I am asking you directly, Mr. Whitmore, whose choice is this?" Gerald's jaw tightened. "Miss Hepburn, I have a restaurant to run. And I have a reservation. For 2. He made one final attempt. "A private dining room," he said. "Quieter, more comfortable, no disruption to either party. A solution," he called it. Audrey repeated the word slowly. "A private dining room." She looked at Clara. Clara said nothing. Her silence was its own answer. Audrey picked up her gloves from the host stand. She looked at Gerald. Then she looked past him, at the full room beyond, every face that had been watching and had not moved. "Then we're finished here," she said. She extended her hand to Clara. Clara looked at it for just a moment, the white glove, the open palm, the absolute steadiness of it. And then she took it. And the 2 of them walked out of the Mayfair Grill together, through the door, past the string quartet that had stopped playing entirely, past the table of businessmen who had not said a single word, past the woman in the green dress who was still holding her wine glass in midair, and out onto the wet pavement of Fifth Avenue, where the taxicabs were still moving and the amber lights were still burning and the city was still doing what cities do, completely indifferent to what had just happened inside. They didn't speak for half a block. It was Clara who stopped first. She stood on the sidewalk, her breath making small clouds in the cold March air, and she pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to hold something in. Then she looked at Audrey and said, "You didn't have to do that." Audrey looked back at her. "Yes," she said, "I did. I should have done it 100 times before tonight. Every time you said you'd eat later. Every time you waited in the car." She paused. "That's on me, Clara, not you. It was never on you." Clara didn't answer, but her hand, when she reached up to adjust her coat collar, was shaking slightly. They found a small Italian restaurant 11 blocks north, a narrow, warm place with checkered tablecloths and a waiter who seated them immediately, without ceremony, without hesitation, as though 2 women wanting dinner together was the most ordinary thing in the world, which of course it was. They ordered, they ate, they talked about small things. A film Clara had seen the previous weekend, a letter Audrey had received from her mother in Amsterdam. Neither of them mentioned the Mayfair Grill. But the Mayfair Grill was not finished with them. Back inside that dining room, something had shifted in the air that Gerald Whitmore could feel but not name. 3 tables had gone quiet in a way that was different from the quiet of people enjoying their meals. The Society columnist Margaret Holloway, 48 years old, who had attended the Mayfair Grill every Thursday for 11 years, had closed her menu without ordering and was writing something in a small leather notebook with focused, deliberate strokes. If this story is moving you, subscribe right now and share this video. These are the moments that history almost lost. We tell them because they deserve to be heard. Margaret Holloway filed her column the next morning at 6:45. She had been writing for the New York Social Register for 19 years and had never once used the word courage in a society piece. She used it 3 times in this one. Her editor read it twice before he ran it, and when he did, he moved it from page 6 to page 3. By noon, it had been reprinted in full by 2 other newspapers. By Thursday, it had reached 7. The headline was simple: Miss Hepburn chooses friendship over fashion. The response was not simple at all. Within 4 days, Audrey's agent received 11 letters, some from studio executives, some from advertisers, some from publicists who represented people whose names appeared regularly in the same columns that had just printed Margaret Holloway's words. The letters were polite. They were also clear. 2 pending production discussions were quietly withdrawn. A cosmetics company that had been in final negotiations for an endorsement contract sent a single paragraph declining to proceed. No explanation was given in any of them. None was needed. Her agent, a careful man named Robert Lessing, who had built his entire career on the principle that talent was worthless without access, called Audrey into his office on the 4th day and sat across from her with his hands folded on his desk and told her that the situation could still be managed. A brief statement, he said. Nothing apologetic, simply a clarification that the evening had been misrepresented. That she had the deepest respect for the Mayfair Grill and its long tradition of excellence. That nothing had been intended as it appeared. Audrey listened to all of it. Then she said, "I had dinner with my friend, Robert. We were refused a table. We left. There is nothing in that sequence of events that requires clarification." Robert Lessing looked at his desk for a long moment. "This could cost you considerably," he said. "I know," she said. And she meant it fully, without drama, the way someone speaks when they have already made their peace with a thing. What neither of them knew yet was what was building on the other side of those withdrawn contracts. Margaret Holloway's column had reached people that studio executives had not accounted for. Not industry people, not advertisers, but ordinary readers. Letters began arriving at the newspaper, then at Audrey's production company, then, remarkably, at the Mayfair Grill itself. Dozens first, then hundreds. Almost none of them were angry at Audrey Hepburn. Almost all of them were asking Gerald Whitmore why. Gerald Whitmore removed the informal policy from the Mayfair Grill's operational guidelines 8 months later. He did not hold a press conference. He did not issue a statement. He simply revised a staff memo one quiet Tuesday morning and said nothing about it to anyone. The signs came down the way they always do when people finally accept they were wrong, not with ceremony, but with silence. The Mayfair Grill changed ownership in 1963. The new owner, a 31-year-old man named David Park, said in a 1971 interview that he had chosen that location deliberately. "I wanted to make it mean something different," he said. "I think I did." Clara Simmons worked in the film and theater industry for another 12 years after that March evening. She became a senior costume supervisor at a respected New York theater company and was known by everyone who worked with her as someone of extraordinary precision and quiet grace. In the 1969 interview, asked about the turning point of her career, she said only this: "There was a night in 1954 when someone refused to look away. It changed what I believed was possible." She never mentioned Audrey by name. She didn't need to. As for Audrey, she never spoke publicly about the Mayfair Grill. Not once. She simply kept moving forward, using her name for things that mattered, spending the final years of her life sitting with forgotten children in the hungriest corners of the world, refusing, always, to look away. She had made that promise to herself in 1944, standing at a cold window in Arnhem, watching a truck disappear around a corner. She kept it for the rest of her life. If this story reached something in you, share it, subscribe, and hit that like button. And tell us in the comments, have you ever walked out of a room for the right reason? We read every single one.